Hello students, I am Raghavan Kumar Singh, faculty of US Academy and Institute. Today we will discuss class 8th history's 4th chapter, tribal, Dikus and the vision of a golden age. In this chapter we will discuss about the problems of Birsa set out to resolve. Who are the outsiders being referred to as Dikus, and how did they enslave the peoples of the region? What was happening to the tribal peoples under the British? How did their lives change? So, let us discuss. The customs and ritual followed by most tribes were very difficult from those laid down by Brahmins. These societies were not characterized by division of caste societies. All those who belonged to the same tribe thought of themselves as sharing common ties of kinship, but they did have social and economical differences within tribes. Now, how did tribal groups live? The tribal peoples of India were involved in a variety of activities by the 19th century. Some were jhum cultivators. Some tribal peoples practiced jhum cultivation, that is, shifting cultivation. This cultivation is done on small patches of land, and the planters cut down the tree tops to allow sunlight to reach the ground and burnt the vegetation to clear it for cultivation. After the crop was ready and harvested, they were shifted to another field. Shifting cultivators were found in the hilly and forested tracts of northeast and central India. These tribals people moved freely within the forest, and that's the reason they practiced shifting cultivation. Some of the hunters and gatherers tribal groups in many regions survived on hunting animals and gathering forest produce. The Khond, or which was a community who survived on collecting hunts and divide the meat amongst themselves. This community ate fruits and roots and used oil extracted from the seeds of the sal and mahua to cook food. Shrubs and herbs were used for forest for medicinal purposes. The people exchanged goods with the things they need in return for the valuable forest products. When the forest product shrank, tribal peoples had to wander out in search of work as laborer. Tribal groups were dependent on traders and money lenders because they often needed money to buy and sell in order to be able to get the goods that were not produced within the locality. But the interest charged on the loans were very high. Some herders animals. Herding and rearing was also an occupation for many tribal groups. They were pastoralists who moved with their herds of cattle or sheep according to the season. Some took to settle cultivation. Tribal groups, even before the 19th century, began settling down the land from the mundas of Chotanagpur belongs to the clan as a whole. All members of the clan were regarded as descendants of the original settlers who had first cleared the land. British officials saw settled tribal groups are more civilized than hunter gatherers or shifting cultivators. Now, how did colonial rule affect tribals' life? During British rule, the lives of the tribal people changed. What happens to tribal chiefs? Before the British arrived, the tribal chiefs were important peoples. They enjoyed economical power and had the right to administer and control their territories. But their functions and power changed under British control. They lost their administrative powers and were forced to follow laws made by British officials in India. Now, what happened to the shifting cultivators? The British wanted tribal groups to settle down as it was easier to control and administer settled peasants. The British introduced land settlements to get regular revenue sources from the states. Land settlement means the British measured the land, defined the right of each individual to that land, and fixed the revenue demanded for the states. The British efforts to settle Jhum cultivators was not very successful. Facing widespread protests, the British had to ultimately allow them the right to carry on shifting cultivation in some parts of the forest. Now, forest law and their impacts. Tribal lives were directly affected by the changes in forest law. Some forests were classified as reserve forest as they produced timber which the British wanted. The Britishers people stopped the tribal peoples entering the forest, but they faced a problem of getting laborers. So the colonial officer came up with the solution. The solution officials decided to give Jhum cultivators some patches of land in the forest and allow them to cultivate. In return, those who lived in the villages had to provide labor to the forest department. Many tribal groups disobey. The new rule continued with the practices that were declared illegal and at times rose in open rebellion. The problem with trade. During the 19th century, traders and moneylenders started coming into the forest more often. They wanted to buy forest products, offered cash loan, and asked tribal groups to work for ages. In the 19th century, the demand for Indian silk was high in European market. The silk market expanded, so the East India Company encouraged silk production. The Santals of Hazaribagh reared cocoon, and the traders dealing in silk gave loans to the tribal peoples and collected the cocoons. The middleman made huge profits. Now, the search for work. From the late 19th century, tea plantation started coming up and mining became an important industry. Tribals were recruited in large numbers to work at the tea plantation of Assam and the coal mines of Jharkhand. Now a closer look. Tribal groups from different parts of the country rebelled against the changes in law, the restriction on their practices, the new taxes they had to pay, and the exploitation by traders and moneylenders. Birsa Munda. Birsa Munda was born in the mid 1870s, and as an adolescent, he heard tales of Munda uprising of the past and saw Sirdar, means the leader of the community, arguing the peoples to revolt. In the local missionary school, he heard that it was possible for the Mundas to attain the kingdoms of heaven and regain their lost rights. Birsa also spent some time in the company of a prominent Vaishnava preachers. Birsa started a movement and it aimed at reforming tribal societies. He urged the Mundas to give up drinking liquor, clean their villages, and stop believing in witchcraft and sorcery. In 1895, Birsa argued his followers to recover their glorious past. He talked of a golden age in the past, a Satyug, the age of truth, when Mundas lived a good life, constructed embankment, tapped natural spring, planted trees and orchards, practiced cultivation to earn their living. The political aim of the Birsa movement was to drive out missionaries, moneylenders, Hindu landlords, and the governments and set up a Munda Raj, with Birsa at its head. The movement was widespread, so the British officials decided to act. Birsa started touring the villages to gain support using traditional symbols and language to rouse peoples, urging them to destroy Ravana, means Dikus and the Europeans, and establish a kingdom under the leadership. In 19th century, Birsa died of cholera and the movement faded out. But the movement was significant in at least two ways. First, it forced the colonial government to introduce laws so that the land of the tribals could not be easily taken over by Dikus. Second, it showed once again that the tribal peoples had the capacity to protest against injustice and express their anger against colonial rule.